everyone, welcome to Ranmalee Teacher's History class. Today we are going to start the grade 10 lessons. So, I already have uploaded grade 6 lesson. From grade 6 to grade 11, I am going to do the lessons. So, if you would like to join to my classes, you can subscribe my channel and press the bell icon. Then you will get to know the every new video I upload. Today we are going to talk about the classification of sources, lesson 1.1. Sources of study history. Classification of sources. History is a subject which studies the past human activities. When we study the history of 100 and 1000 years back, we find writings and various creations made by people who lived in those ages. They are called sources because information about past human activities can be extracted from them. When the information taken from those sources are studied logically, the history about people's lives in each period is formed. Sources which are available to study history, they are mainly divided into two: literary sources, archaeological sources. Books and documents written at different time periods by the people who lived in the past are considered literary sources. Relics, monuments, coins, inscriptions, and various kinds of ruins which was excavated in archaeological researches and experiments are called archaeological sources. Literary sources can be divided into two: local literary sources and foreign literary sources. The text written by Sri Lankans in the form of verses and poetry from time to time about 1000 years ago are considered as local literary sources. The books written by foreigners mentioning information about Sri Lanka are called foreign literary sources. Local literary sources, foreign literary sources. The oldest text founded in Sri Lanka is known as Deepavansa, which was written in 4th century AD. Deepavansa gives information about of this country up to the end of King Mahasen's ruling period, and it gives lot of information about Buddhist order of Sri Lanka at that time. Deepavansa, Mahavansa and lot of local literary sources were written on Ola leaves. Mahavansa was composed as a local historical chronicle with lesser mistakes than Deepavansa. Mahavansa is a text with several parts. The first part of Mahavansa was written by Mahanama Theru, who lived in Diksanga Senabiya Pirevena, which was affiliated to the Mahavihara. The first part of Mahavansa consists of historical informations of this country from the arrival of Lord Buddha to Sri Lanka up to the end of ruling time of King Mahasena. This part had been written in 5th or 6th century AD. There are a lot of similarities between Deepavansa and Mahavansa. The reason for these similarities may have been influence of the early text such as Sihala Attakatha Mahavansa, Uttara Vihara Attakatha, and Vinaya Arthakatha, which were written before these two sources. The history of Mahavansa has been written continuously in The history of Sri Lanka has been written continuously in Mahavansa, as there are limited number of countries which the history has been written in one continuous text. Sri Lankans can be very proud because the history of this country has been written in one text. Mahavansa is considered more creditable literary source because some historical events recorded in Mahavansa was confirmed by the inscriptions and various kinds of ruins. About 4 centuries after writing Mahavansa in Pali, for the convenience of the Sinhala people, the Mahavansa already converted into Sinhala. It is known as Mahavansa Tikava, annotation of Mahavansa. It is named as Vansatta Pakasini. It consists lot of informations which are not available in some other sources. A number of books which had been written from Anuradhapura kingdom to Kandyan kingdom the books considered as Buddhist religious texts such as Bodhivansa, Tupavansa, Dhatuvansa, Pujavaliya, Saddharma Lankare are most important local literary sources. The Nikaya Sangrahaya, which has been written on the history of Buddhist order, and the Rajavaliya, which included political information of this country, are very important to study the history of Gampala and Kotte period. Sandesha Kavya, Prashasti Kavya, Hatan Kavya are more important to study the political history about in Kotte and Kandyan kingdom. Sandesha Kavya. So there are a lot of names of the birds because this Sandesha means the messages given by the kings using these birds. So the names of the birds are given to these texts. Sandesha Kavya, Maurya Sandesha, Tisara Sandesha, Salalihini Sandesha, Prashasti Kavya. So praising the service rendered by Parakrambau II, Parakumbha Sirita. Hatan Kavya, the wars in between Sinhalese and Europeans who came to our country during this Kotte to Kandyan kingdoms periods. These wars were happened. So they have written about those wars. So it is very easy to find out the political environment of that period. Sitawaka Hatana, Constantinu Hatana, Ingiris Satana. The local books were written during different periods and the reasons which influenced to write them too are different. The books which had been written from Anuradhapura era to beginning of Kotte era had religious objectives. Some books were written a few centuries after the historical incident happened. When we form our history using literary source, we have to pay attention to the facts given below. The time in which source were written, the time period is very valuable. If it is long time period, it is not valuable. The literary source is not valuable. If it is in the similar time period or a little bit longer than the incident happened, it is very valuable. The author of the source. So in ancient Sri Lanka, a lot of monks used to write and read. So they are the educated people at that time. So that when we are selecting a source also, the author is very valuable. And the author's objectives. So earlier I mentioned Saddhammalankara mentioned about the Buddhist order of Sri Lanka, Rajavaliya mentioned about the political environment. So there are different types of objectives in that. So the objective also very valuable when we are paying attention to the facts of the source. The way in which facts were obtained for the source. So I told you that Mahavansa already is very valuable because it is a very creditable book, because the information of Mahavansa already confirmed by the inscriptions and ruins. So we can understand the facts are very true. So facts, the way that facts were obtained is very valuable. Foreign literary sources. So Sri Lanka is situated in the middle of the Indian Ocean. From the ancient time, we maintained trade relations with the foreign countries. From early period of Anuradhapura era, many foreigners who were engaged in trade activities in the Indian Ocean were aware of this country. Foreigners had written a lot of books and kept records in about our country. From ancient times, there was a good relation between Sri Lanka and India. Some Tamil books such as Sirappadikaram, Manimekkale, Pattiripu, written in India, to have information about Sri Lanka. Some foreigners tended even to write books with the separate information about Sri Lanka after the arrival of Portuguese in this country in 16th century. We can clearly see that there had been writers who came to Sri Lanka and studied and wrote about it, as well as writers who did not visit to Sri Lanka also give lot of information about Sri Lanka from their records. You can see a lot of nations have written about Sri Lanka. Greek sources. Dumendo by Aristotle. Indica by Megasthenes. The records of Honesticus. Roman sources. Neutralis Historia by Pliny. Approach to the geography by Ptolemy. Sri Lankan map by Ptolemy. Chinese sources. The books on records of tours of Hun Santero. Portuguese sources. The books about Sri Lanka by Father Fernio de Queiroz. Chinese sources. Hun Santero's traveling account on Buddhist kingdom. So Sri Lanka at that time mentioned as Buddhist kingdom. Arabian sources. Ibn Battuta's traveling accounts. Portuguese sources. Rubairo's book on history of Sri Lanka. Rubairo's Sri Lankan history. Holland sources. The book of Philippus Bolgius. The Sri Lankan Chronicle of Bolgius. English sources. Robert Knox book and historical relation of the island of Ceylon. Sinhala translation Da Heladiga. Fayan Santero. Fayan Santero arrived to Sri Lanka in 5th century AD. He stayed in Anuradhapura Mahavinaya for 2 years. He was mention about some things existed in Sri Lanka in his travelling accounts. You can see the Mahayana there. Yunsen Tero, he came to India on a pilgrimage. He left China in 629 AD. He did not come to Sri Lanka. He recorded what he learned about Sri Lanka when he was in India. Those informations are important to study the history of this country in the 7th century AD. You can see the Yunsen Tero. They are bhikkhus that belong to the Mahayana Buddhism. Robayo is a Portuguese nation who came to Sri Lanka in 1640 and he served the Portuguese army. By staying 18 years in Sri Lanka, he wrote several books about Sri Lanka by living in Lisbon city in Portugal. Those books are highly important to study the history of Sri Lanka in 17th century. Philippus Bolgius. He is a Dutch priest. He came to Sri Lanka with Dutch army. He made records on social life, language and culture of Sri Lanka. Those records have been published in Dutch and German languages. Bolgius records are important to study the Sri Lankan history in 17th century. You can see the Dutch priest. Robert Knox. In 1658, while he was sailing to Persia, he came to Sri Lanka on 19 November 1659 as the mast of their ship was broken due to the tempest. On that occasion, Robert Knox, along with his 16 people who were in the ship, were arrested by King Rajasingha II. He spent 19 years in Sri Lanka as a prisoner and afterwards he escaped and he went to the Arippu Idimana and escaped to Batavia. In 1680, he went back to England. He wrote a book on his experiences in Sri Lanka. That book was published in 1681 by the name of The Historical Relation of Island of Ceylon. The book consists description and drawings which reflect the Sri Lankan society in the 17th century, the time which he stayed in this country. So you can see the Robert Knox English version and the Sinhala version both, and you can see the Robert Knox also. Fanyo de Queiroz. He was a priest of a Catholic sector. Queiroz was a Portuguese national. In 1688, he wrote a book on Sri Lanka. Its name, The Temporal and Spiritual Conquest of Ceylon. Queiroz did not come to Sri Lanka. He wrote this book when he was staying in India. You can see the Fanyo de Queiroz, the Portuguese priest. We can realize how our ancestors faced various experiences by learning history. Through that, one can get the knowledge necessary of facts, the same problems at the present. History of a country reflects the identity and the citizens who lived in the country. Uses of literary sources. To prepare the historical chronology. So when we are learning the history, the literary sources are more valuable. We have to read the history. After that, we can use archaeological sources to confirm that. To obtain information about political, economic and social affairs in each era. So when a king is ruling a country, we can learn about the king, the way he ruled the country, the political side, the way he developed the country, the economical side, and the people in that period, the social side. So when we are learning about that, we have to read literary sources. To substitute the information provided by the one source with another source. So earlier also I told you, the Mahavansa is more valuable. It is a good credible literary source because the details in Mahavansa are already confirmed by the inscriptions and the ruins. So we can understand the details that are included in Mahavansa is very true. To study the international relations of the country, the foreign relations also. We can, when we are reading the Mahavansa, we can learn about the foreign relation of the kings who kept the foreign relation with the other countries, the invasions, the lot of things we can learn when we are using the literary sources. I hope you enjoy my lesson. This is lesson 1.1. Again I am continuing the lesson 1.2 in another video. Thank you.